Hello, everyone. This is Al Fadi, and I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of this exciting series called Mount Sinai in Arabia. And in the last couple of episodes, my guest, Joel Richardson, laid out enough information to lead us now into building evidence that will point to the alternate location of Mount Sinai as opposed to the traditional location which is found in the Sinai Peninsula and in the vicinity of the so-called St. Catherine complex. With that in mind, let us see now the type of evidence that Joel is going to begin to share with us and how these evidence are supported from a biblical standpoint. Joel, welcome back, and thank you so much for the amazing work that you have done in regard to this particular topic.
Yeah.
So where are we going today?
Okay, so we've kind of laid a lot of introduction and foundation, but again, we're Bible believers.
Amen.
And so we believe the biblical testimony, and really the Bible provides us with the best, most reliable ancient witness. Okay, so at the beginning of the Exodus narrative, we know the story. Moses kills the Egyptian and he flees. Well, what does it say? It says in Exodus 2, verse 15, it says, Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and he settled in the land of Midian. So this is so important. We have to determine where Moses was, where is the land of Midian. Okay, now, this is really interesting because despite, again, the consensus of scholars really putting the mountain over there in the Sinai Peninsula, scholarly consensus also says that the land of Midian was over there in northwest Saudi Arabia, on the eastern side of the Gulf of Aqaba. Okay, but not only did Moses live there for 40 years, of course we know the story. He goes over there and he chases these shepherds away from the well.
That's right.
He meets his future wife-to-be.
And her father is Jethro.
Her father is Jethro. He's the priest of Midian.
Right.
So in Exodus 3, verse 1, it says, Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law. So later he marries Zipporah, of course, his Jethro's daughter. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, let me just interject here real quick. So this translation, I'm not even sure which translation I'm using here. It says the far side of the wilderness. Some translations will say the western side of the wilderness. And that's a bit misleading, and here's why. So in modern times, all maps put north at the top of the map. In the biblical times, east would have been at the top of the map. So when you look at the map that's in Madaba, in Jordan, it's arranged so that north is to the left and south is to the right. East is to the north.
And I tell you why, because the word shemal, it's always like this, which is your hand, and that's how you'll be facing east, and shemal is going that way.
Because the sun rises in the east.
Right.
So the idea is the sun goes down behind you. It goes down in the west. And so sometimes when it says west, it literally means west, but oftentimes what it means is behind you, way on the other side. That's kind of the idea.
Right.
And so when it says it here, it's not literally in the western direction. It's just on the other side, the far side of the desert. And I think that's a much better translation.
Correct.
Many scholars go that route. Okay, so but what we see here is that Mount Sinai, Horeb is simply another name for Sinai. Mount Sinai, or Mount Horeb, is within goat or sheep shepherding range within the land of Midian. It's not too far from the land of Midian. It's not so far away that you wouldn't, carry your sheep to feed them. Okay, now, if it's the traditional site, then, Moses is over there in Saudi Arabia. He has to basically do a 500-mile round trip.
And that will be days and days to make it there.
Multiple days, because he didn't put the goats and the sheep on a boat.
Right.
Okay, we know that. He would have had to go on all the way up around the Gulf.
Not to mention protecting the sheep from any attacks, of course.
Yeah, just to feed them. It doesn't really make sense. If, on the other hand, Jebel al-Luz is the real Mount Sinai, and Midian is over there in northwest Saudi, then he probably went on maybe a 20-mile trip to the mountain, and let's say a 40-mile round trip. That's much more understandable. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. Shepherds are tough guys. They can go long distances. 500 miles, that just really doesn't work. So again, look at a map of the region, just to familiarize everyone. Mm-hmm. Again, the triangle, the black triangle that's in the pizza-shaped Sinai Peninsula, that's the traditional site. But over on the other side is Jebel al-Luz. Now, why do we believe that's the land of Midian. Apart from, again, let's just say scholarly consensus acknowledges this. You buy any Bible atlas, it's going to put Midian over there. Now, there is this qualifier. The Midianites, throughout the biblical narrative, they pop up and they appear in a few different places. So at different times throughout biblical history, they did seem to migrate. But in the days of Moses, they were down here in the ancient heartland of Midian. Mm-hmm. So here's the next interesting bit of evidence. So you have this guy named Claudius Ptolemy. Claudius Ptolemy is the father of geography. He's an ancient first century, okay, a little bit after Jesus, first century Roman geographer. And it's really fascinating what he did in that he didn't make maps, but he made these lists of all these places throughout the earth, and he assigned each of these mountains, cities, seas, rivers, you name it, he assigned them coordinates. And so what map makers have done is they've taken all of his coordinates and they've created these maps of the world according to Ptolemy. And it's amazingly accurate. So in one of Ptolemy's maps, he has over there, again, in looking at this map, you can see the little nub up there. That would be the Sinai Peninsula. Again, I mentioned that in ancient times they didn't quite understand how significant the Sinai Peninsula was. They kind of had it much smaller. But they have these two cities, he has these two cities over there in Saudi Arabia. One is called Madiama, or Madiam. The A is just the Latinization. So Madiam and Modian. Modian and Madiam. Why is that significant? Because in the Septuagint, again, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, whenever you come to the name Midian, there are two variances. Sometimes it's called Madiam, sometimes it's called Midian. Okay, so essentially, by the first century, like even 100 years or so before Jesus, when the Septuagint was translated, again, it started being translated 250 years before Jesus. But during this whole period, let's say the Second Temple period, there was this understanding that Midian were two primary cities over there in Saudi Arabia. Now, why is that significant? So go to the next map. I made this from Google. And you have, when you go there, because again, you can just look at a Google map and you think, well, Moses could have lived anywhere, until you go there and you realize that you have these two towns.
And that's important, by the way. You go there and you went there. Right. So you're not using just Google Map and you've never been there.
Right. And what you see when you get there is first you have this one town called Al-Bid. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that great, but the town of Al-Bid, it's a small town. And then about 20 miles to the west, you have this coastal town called Magna. Mm-hmm. Okay, why do we say these are the two cities that represented Midian? Mm-hmm. Because these are the only two significant oases in the whole region. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is harsh desert region. You don't just live anywhere. And second, not only is Al-Bad a significant oasis, but it's on the ancient Arab caravan route. It's on the highway.
Yeah, by the way, if I'm hearing you say Al-Bad, that's Arab. From an Arabic standpoint, it could also mean the beginning, the starting point of something.
Okay, yeah. But now get this. This is really fascinating because, again, today Christians will say, "Well, there's no evidence that this is the real Mount Sinai." I go, "Really?" That's not the case at all, because the other name for Al-Bid in Arabic is Muga al-Shu'aib, which
Magharat Shu'aib.
Muga al-Shu'aib.
Yeah, so which is the cave of Elijah, I believe.
No,
Jethro. Jethro, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So Shu'aib is essentially the Quranic name for Jethro.
For Jethro, exactly.
So the caves of Jethro, basically the other name, and there's signs when you go there. There's an archaeological park right in the center of town called Jethro's house, for all intents and purposes. These are the caves where Jethro lived, right, which means they're also where Moses lived for 40 years.
Makes sense, of course, yeah.
So it's not like, this is not just some weird Christian evangelical theory. You go there and the locals say, you're in Jethro's house. This is Jethro's hometown.
And by the way, many Saudi students or Saudis in general, Muslims in particular, they point out to Midian and say, hey, it's in Arabia. Of course, they have another motive for that because they want to justify Muhammad's prophethood, of course. But
sure.
But for all intended purposes, they will point to Midian being at the northwestern part of Arabia.
Yeah. And, even more than this, when we were there, there's actually a scholar from Riyadh who her PhD was in the Midianite presence throughout this whole region. And so hopefully in the future we'll be able to talk with her a bit more. But this is the point, is that in truth, this reality, it validates the reality, the truthfulness, the reliability of the Bible. But
that's important.
It's not in conflict with Muslim tradition. So this is not something, this particular issue is not going to cause any religious tension. People of Christian, Jewish, Muslim faith are all going to look at this and say, yes, this validates our belief.
Right.
So, you've got that. Now, here's the kicker. Philo is a Jew, okay? He lived in Alexandria,
Correct.
So he's from Egypt.
Right.
And he essentially intermingled Greek philosophy with biblical commentary. Let's just put it that way. He was a Hellenized Jew. He had been influenced by Greek philosophy and so forth. But in his account, he specifically says that Mount Sinai is the tallest and most holy or sacred mountain in the district of Midian. Okay, we already know where Midian is. Philo says Mount Sinai is the tallest mountain in the land of Midian. Beyond Philo, Josephus, so here's a second Jewish witness from the first century. They're both from roughly the same time period, but Josephus is now living in Jerusalem, so probably from a different Jewish tradition, so to speak. He also says this. He says, now Moses, when he had obtained the favor of Jethro, he stayed there in Midian, and he fed his flock. Sometime afterward, taking his station at the mountain called Sinai, he drove his flocks there to feed them. This is the highest of all the mountains thereabout. So you have these two nearly identical statements that Mount Sinai is in the region of Midian and it's the tallest mountain in the region. Well, again, we know where Midian is. We know that Roman geography placed Midian over there in Saudi Arabia. And we know that the tallest mountain in that region is Jebel Aluz. So here you have this ancient Jewish tradition that there is no other mountain. Of all the candidates, there is no other mountain that has an ancient Jewish tradition going back all the way to the first century, arguably, if you include the testimony of the Septuagint, going back to hundreds of years before Jesus. There's not a single other mountain that has any ancient Jewish testimony connected to it. Well, as a result of this Jewish testimony, the Christians maintained it. And so all the way up until the 4th century, despite Justinian building St. Catherine's, you have Eusebius, the great church historian, as well as Jerome, the Latin translator. They both also identify Mount Sinai as over there in Saudi Arabia. So you have this Jewish tradition that was carried on by the Christians right up until the 4th century. Then it starts disappearing, again, because of what Justinian did. But here's what's fascinating, is that who preserved this tradition? The Muslims. And so in the 7th century, a few hundred years later, Muhammad comes along and then his successors. And what did they find? But Muslim historians talk about finding these Christian monks up there in the mountains praying up in the region of Jebel Aluz. And so while Christianity is largely forgotten about it, while Judaism is largely forgotten about this tradition, and it's just sitting right there, the local Muslims are very familiar with this. So that's a powerful testimony.
Interesting. And also, the names they use really coincide with biblical names as well, like Shoaib, for instance, for Jethro, Jebel Musa, Mount of Moses, Jebel Lawz. It's kind of interesting because it does look like an almond or pistachio, if you wish, So all of that is really interesting.
Yeah. And there's a lot more. So we've kind of laid out, I'll say, the geographic reasons and the traditional reasons. We've got this ancient tradition, but there is an abundance of other powerful evidence. We're going to look at some pictures in some of the upcoming episodes.
So what are the audience, what should they expect, I should say, in the next couple of episodes?
So now we're going to start jumping into the petroglyphs, some of the rock formations, some of the archaeology around the mountain. And when it all adds up, it's a really compelling, and I mean, it's stunning. It's stunning. Let's just put it this way. And to see the pictures itself is impressive.
Exactly.
But to go there and see it in real life is life-changing. It's that powerful.
Absolutely. Thank you, brother. And thank you, everyone, for joining us in another episode of Mount Sinai in Arabia, this new video series. And hopefully you're enjoying these episodes that we have already released. Continue to interact with us. Send us your comments and your questions. Until we meet again, have a blessed day. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. We can't make these quality videos without the help of partners like you. So please consider becoming a Patreon supporter today at patreon.com/CIRA International. I want to make sure you always get notified when we release a new video. So please click the bell to be notified, and of course, make sure to subscribe to this channel. If this video was helpful to you, please click the thumbs up. Thank you.